When the Germans invaded Belgium at the beginning of World War I, the city of Brussels just allowed the Germans to go through unhindered rather than risk having their city destroyed. And an American journalist there at the time describes the German army as a machine, endless, tireless, with the delicate organization of a watch and the brute power of a steamroller. The journalist went on to say that the Germans arrived at 11 o'clock on the 20th of August to a pretty empty city. Most of the people had fled the streets, but they came out to watch this endless roll of German soldiers marching through their streets, singing in unison. And without any gaps, it took the entire German army 3 days to march through Brussels from beginning to end, an entire column of grey. Now, although the rape of Belgium is largely put down to British propaganda, the Germans did commit atrocities when they were in Belgium. For instance, they all but destroyed the city of Leuven, or Leuven, I don't know how to pronounce it, and killed about 20,000 civilians. And this and the hunger encouraged a lot of Belgians to flee the country. And by 1915, around 1 million Belgians were in the Netherlands. So to prevent any more Belgians fleeing the country, the Germans built a huge electrical fence along the border. And some Belgians still tried to get across and were successful by digging tunnels or even pole vaulting over. But many more were not, and the Germans would execute anybody they found near the fence without a good reason, and it's estimated that around 2,000 people died by being electrocuted. Now, I think it's hard to appreciate just how many Europeans were refugees at this time, but to give you some numbers, it's said that around 500,000 Serbians left the country towards Albania over mountains, but they estimate around half of them died en route, and around 6 million Russians fled from the west to the east to cities like Pskov, and there they were housed in railway stations and schools. And it's said that these refugees, who were housed in very squalid conditions, brought the turmoil of the front to all Russian cities, and this could in part be the cause of the Russian Revolution. However, there was also an untold amount of Armenians who fled the country after the Ottomans began to persecute them. Now, there would be very similar numbers for all European nations on the front line. But keeping with the Belgians, around 250,000 of them came to Britain, and the small city of Folkestone had about 16,000 Belgians arrive every day by sea, and at that time the Belgians sort of transformed Britain. For instance, near my hometown of Newcastle there's a small town called Berkeley, and that became a sort of Belgian colony at the time. Well, around 6,000 Belgians arrived there to make shells for the war effort. But the whole new village was built for them with new schools and churches, and it was called Elizabethville. And thousands more Belgians were spread out across the country, and a Belgian refugee was also said to be the inspiration for Poirot. However, you may have noticed that there's not a great Belgian community in Britain today, or any real Belgian culture there, despite this being the largest wave of immigration in Britain's history. Well, there's a very simple explanation for this. Now, they weren't kicked out per se, but the British government wanted army veterans to return home and find employment. So many Belgians couldn't renew their employment contracts, and they were offered a free one-way ticket home, so 90% of them left Britain.